Right. Fabulous. Right. Welcome everyone to today's Insights event. It's working with the chicken and the egg, both mental health and substance use needs in probation. Just a little housekeeping to get us started. As I said, the event is being recorded and it will be available via the Insights website and the Inspectorate website after the event, although we won't record the open discussion section at the end. We're also trialling recording some of the key points with a difference, which I'm really excited about. And so we've got a visual scriber with us today who's going to capture some visual notes, thanks to the very talented Julia, and we'll circulate this to attendees after the event. Like I said, would really welcome you leaving your camera on. I think for me, it's certainly nice to see people's faces as we talk. I'm sure our speakers will agree. But bear in mind, if you are on my screen, you will feature in the recording, so completely up to you. Please do keep your microphone on mute during the presentation. There will be a discussion and observation section at the end, so do pop your questions in the chat as we go along and we'll get to them, hopefully. For those who feel like the slides are a little bit small on their screen, if you navigate to the top of your screen, there's 3 dots, which I think the official name is an ellipses. Underneath that is it says more. If you click on the drop down there, and there is on the drop down menu something that says focus on content. If you click on that, it will make the slides bigger for you. There is also an option there to turn on live captions if you need that, although it doesn't seem to recognise my accent. It's not a fan of Derbyshire accents. Got some great speakers for you today, so I just want to provide you with a bit of an agenda so you know what to expect. Excuse me. First of all, we'll share the principles of effective case supervision in general, and we'll use the Inspectorate standards as a baseline for that. And then Mignon French, give us a wave, Mignon. She's from NHS England and NHS Improvement, and she'll cover the community substance treatment requirements, quite a mouthful there, or CSTRs as people may know them, and the importance of getting the sentence right. Then Charlie Brooker, want to give us a wave or say hi? From Royal Holloway University of London, will provide some headlines of working effectively with mental health needs. And Sunny Dhadley, give us a wave, strategic advisor and consultant, will provide some headlines of working effectively with substance misuse needs. And last but by no means least, Avatar Singh, inspector with HMI Inspectorate of Probation, will then bring it all together for us. As I said, we'll then have an opportunity for discussions and observations at the end, commencing with thoughts on top 3 actions to improve things. So we did circulate a bit of a prompt or a pledge for people. So if you feel inspired as we go along, please do write your pledges about what actions you're going to take as a result of what you've heard. Okay, right, so I'm going to kick us off. And first of all, I want us to look at the principles of effective supervision and do so following the ASPIRE model. ASPIRE standing for assessment, sentence planning, implementation and delivery, review and evaluation. So what I want you to do is look at this picture, and if I ask you to tell me what it was of, what springs to mind immediately? You don't need to say it out loud, but just think in your head what you would describe that as. First instinct is probably it's photographs on a wall, but in reality that's an assumption. For all we know, it could be wallpaper, maybe it's a close-up of a TV, or it could be a book cover. Then if I ask you to go into more detail and say, so it's a photograph of photos, what are the photographs of? I think my gut instinct would be to say people, but actually are all the photographs there of people? We don't really know that information's missing. So it's really important to think about how you might bring that picture into focus, what sources of information you might use to do so. So you might want to ask the person who took the picture, you might want to ask the person who lives where it was taken. And for me, the same applies for assessments. It's really important to think about how we bring a focus to the individual's whole identity and not just the information we first receive. When I was pulling this together, I thought for mental health and substance misuse, I think that's particularly important. Some people kind of go around the system, and sometimes what's written on the records might bias them the next time they enter the system. That might then stop us thinking about what's driving their behaviour, or I think we've all had those people who've been in and out of treatment, and sometimes people say, oh, they're back round again, they're not going to change. That's probably not helpful, because something might be different for them this time. You know, I think isn't it the average time you go around the process of change is 13 times, I think, if I remember rightly. So it's really important we capture what's relevant at that time. So HMIP's assessment and planning standards state assessments and planning should be well informed, holistic, analytical and personalised, and importantly actively involve the person on probation. So what we mean by that in this context, a good assessment is evidence-based. It includes a wide range of sources of information. So we usually cite police, social services. I think for mental health and substance use needs, other examples that are really important is the current and previous treatment providers, treatment and behaviour in prison, potentially those reconnect workers that are coming on board, or any other mentors. Think about self-harm or suicide concerns. And that's not an exhaustive list, but gives you an indication of things to think about. And I think engaging with partners also means plans can be aligned across all agencies working with the individual. And I think, again, for me, it's really important to get that positive working alliance. As we said, it should be holistic. So the assessment needs to consider the individual, but also all the systems that are impacting on that individual. So that's their family, their partner, their peers, and importantly, their culture and community. So could everyone just pop themselves on mute while we're recording? Thanks. It should provide a balance of risk factors and the individual's own vulnerabilities. So that includes their health and well-being, as well as positive factors. A good assessment is analytical and not descriptive. So the assessment should really dig into the individual's patterns of behaviour, the underlying causes of what's happened, and it should think about the capacity to comply with any sentence given. The assessor should think about how all the factors intersect and impact on their offending, whether that be pushing them more into it or pulling them out of it. And I think where there's comorbidity, it's really important to think about how each need impacts and drives the other. Finally, it should be personalised, it's relevant to the specific individual and their specific identity. So be aware of diversity factors, adverse childhood experiences, adult trauma. Sorry, can you put yourselves on mute? Thank you. Linking back to some of the previous points, the personal circumstances and links to family and community. Whilst it's not an exhaustive list, I think, again, for mental health and substance use needs, it should cover things like patterns of use, patterns of behaviours, triggers for the individual, risk-taking behaviours, family history, the individual's awareness of the needs, the underlying causes, what presenting problems that person has, and vulnerability concerns. That's in terms of abuse, exploitation, self-harm and suicide. Plans should really focus on engaging that person, to seeking to overcome or at least mitigate barriers to engagement, and then the practical and emotional obstacles to recovery and assistance. So things like stigma, relationships, in addition to the usual things of promoting safety, managing risk and assistance. Should actively involve the person on probation, and that needs to be meaningful. It needs to be more than just shown. They need to be involved in writing the assessment and plan, because if it will feel more relevant to them, and then they're more likely to engage with it. Next, thinking about implementation and delivery, I want you to think about learning a new skill. So it's maybe a skill that you think could really help you in life, but it's going to take a bit of work to get that skill. So the example I've thought of is being a car mechanic, because it would be good not to have to ring the garage every time I break down. Although last time I broke down, I did run out of petrol. That's quite embarrassing. So learning to be a car mechanic, how might you feel if you go into the first lesson and the teacher assumes that you've got knowledge? And so in the very first lesson, they say to you, can you just go and replace the alternator? But you don't even know how to open the bonnet. You might laugh at that, but some of them are complicated now. Or what if you went into the first lesson to learn how to change the engine and it focused on the history of the automobile or the highway code? Or potentially halfway through your course, you've done like 6 lessons, you're proper into it, All of a sudden, the instructor's off sick, the supply teacher comes in, and they start all over again from scratch. Not ideal. So to be effective in implementation and delivery of probation services, it should be high quality, with well-focused, personalised and effective coordinating services delivered with a focus on engaging the person on probation, because then you're going to get the most out of it. So thinking about mental health and substance use specifically, it will consider the individual's personal circumstances and focus on how to effectively support safety of the individual themselves and of others. It will think about health, well-being, recovery and assistance, and support the individual to overcome the challenges in accessing treatment, aftercare, recovery services to be the most effective. And that really does mean relying on a positive working alliance around the person. Okay. And finally, to think about reviewing. Have you ever invested in a personal change? I'm sure you have. Maybe stop procrastinating, reduce drinking, quit smoking, or the one I'm always trying to do, lose weight. So I'll take that example. If you're losing weight, the first thing you're going to want to do is think about how you're going to measure your progress. So you most likely weigh yourself, or you might measure a specific point on your body. So you're underway, you're making some changes and you've taken some positive action. You want to review your progress, right? Let's say, for instance, you started going to the gym daily, but you still weren't losing weight or changing shape. You'd then have to sit back and do an analysis and go, what's going wrong? What am I not doing? So if it was someone who was observing you go to the gym but didn't talk to you, they might draw a conclusion that you're eating too much. But what if you're actually going to the gym and you were just going for a swim? And then when someone actually talks to you about what you're doing in the gym, you do 2 lengths, then you jump in the jacuzzi and you just sit there. So each review would then lead to a different analysis, and then that would lead to a different plan of action to take in order to meet your initial target. So thinking about this in probation land, our standards around review of probation services state reviewing of progress should be well informed, analytical, personalised and actively involve the person on probation. So in this context, it should analyse how the plan is supporting individuals to comply and engage, what is contributing to keeping people safe, do the controls need to be dialed up or down, how is it aiding recovery and positive well-being, how is it impacting on risk and assistance. If there are lapses, explore the lapses, because that's a part of the path of recovery. Look at the triggers to it. Look at any changes in treatment or interventions which have happened or are required to happen. But I think it's also important to acknowledge any improvements and bear witness to positive changes. Think about if these changes can be sustained as is, or if something else needs to be done to kind of propel them further. And all partners and the individual should be actively involved in that. I would add the caveat there as well that assessments are really dynamic. People's lives change really quickly. So assessments and plans should be under constant review. So those are the general principles from our standards. So now I'd like to focus in on sentencing and then mental health and substance use needs specifically. So I want you to imagine going to your doctors with concerns for your health. Let's say you're having regular migraines and it's those migraines that are really, they're in your head and it's impacting on your day-to-day business. So once you've got past the 8 o'clock phone call to the GP, you've got your appointment and you go in and you tell the GP, oh, look, I'm having these migraines, they're coming regular, they're hitting me all the time, it's impacting on my life. GP comes up, hands you a plaster. Think about how you might feel with that. You'd most likely be a little bit upset, frustrated, potentially angry. And I think that to me is an analogy to show how important it is to understand the person's presenting problems. What are the underlying issues? What's causing it? What does it mean for them? How does it impact on their life specifically? And what previous treatment experiences have they had? Because that can help then recommend the right treatment or sentence. So if you think about that in terms of mental health and substance use, for me, that illustrates why it's so important to request specialist assessments and maximise the opportunity of the person getting the best sentence for their needs. So Mignon French is now going to talk to us a bit about the Community Sentence Treatment Requirement Programme, which the Inspectorate highlighted as effective practice in both the mental health and the substance misuse thematics. Thank you. Over to you, Mignon.
Thank you, Tammy. And that was really interesting. Thank you. We seem to have a bit of an echo. Yeah, is that better? That's better. Okay, so thank you so much for inviting me. That's and it was a really good analogies that you brought it to life, especially the importance of assessments and identifying people in the right place and at the right time. So I'm just going to provide an overview of the mental health treatment requirement programme that I'm overseeing on behalf of NHS England. We're currently in the process of scaling it up across 100% of England. I didn't think I'd ever say that, but that's quite hot off the press. So we've got some brilliant news. So if you could just go on to the first slide, Tammy, and I just want to provide an example of where the mental health treatment requirement sits within the criminal justice pathway. So this section has been highlighted as community sentence treatment requirements, and mental health treatment requirements is just one of the 3 treatment requirements that are available to the judiciary for sentencing. So these are not new. These have been around since 2003. And I'm sure that you're all very familiar with the treatment requirements. So collectively, we're calling them community sentence treatment requirements. But they're for drug, alcohol and mental health. Unfortunately, they are not very well used. You can see in 2019 that they were actually the least used out of all the treatment requirements. In the past couple of months, and I'm touching wood here, they have done a bit of an increase, a little bit of an upturn. They're still very low, so we're not getting too excited, but they are moving in the right direction. But if you imagine individuals that are coming into court and coming into probation, I think you will appreciate the needs of those individuals absolutely fit with with some of these treatment requirements. So in order to address the low use and to increase the use of the treatment requirements, in 2007, a CSTR programme was formed that has now moved into a CSTR partnership. And that was a national partnership with Department of Health, Ministry of Justice, HMPPS and OHID and NHS England. So the aim of the programme was to increase the use of the 3 treatment requirements, to reduce reoffending, provide alternatives to the judiciary for short custodial sentences. But we can only do that if we actually understand why people are offending in the first place and address some of the underlying reasons. And just quickly to mention that, of course, community sentences are now being well recognised in many documents, many papers, and of course, not least Dame Carol Black, who made a recommendation. Her actual recommendation was 100% coverage of the CSTR programme, which in this context was about the mental health treatment requirement element of it, so we could have a scale up right across England. So we're achieving that, hopefully. If you could go on to the next slide, please. So and the next one, if you just click again and drop it down. Yeah, that's brilliant. Sorry. So we'll now focus on the element that I'm leading on, which is the mental health treatment requirement. So actually, which came out of the joint thematic inspection last year, it actually stated that thousands of people with mental illness are coming into the criminal justice system each year, but their needs are being missed at every stage. So you as probation officers, as people are coming in, you're seeing them at the point where actually many opportunities have been missed before they're actually picked up and their needs are addressed. We know that short custodial sentences, I'm not going to go into that, you will know better than I, that short custodial sentences are not as effective as robust community orders, and there's a link there that can take you through to some more information on that. But if we just consider for a moment the types of individuals that are suitable for the mental health treatment requirement programme that we are delivering, and that is people with complex mental health issues. They've got histories of trauma, they might have histories of abuse, dual diagnosis. In this respect, we're talking about mental health and substance misuse. They'll have underlying personality disorders, neurodisabilities and social issues as well. So, but with all of these issues together, many are still not able to access secondary care or specialist secondary care services because they're deemed to be not serious enough. So if you hold that thought in your mind and make a picture of the individuals that you know that are coming in to probation, those are the people that we're talking about that might be suitable for a mental health treatment requirement. Okay, so what is it? So what are we actually delivering? So this is a dedicated program with new clinical staff, new clinical psychologists, assistant psychologists, primary care practitioners that are screening, assessing and delivering the treatment interventions. So each area, we call them a site, which covers a county or a population size. None of them are less than 300,000 to 400,000 population size, and it's overseen by a multidisciplinary steering group. That steering group is overseeing the scale up and the increased use of the 3 treatment requirements and the primary care mental health treatment requirement. And the mental health treatment requirement is commissioned through the Health and Justice Commissioners, through NHS England. So the steering group develops processes and pathways to cut through and develop clear pathways for the increased use of these 3 treatment requirements. NHS England, we are effectively, this is a new programme. So we have to make sure that the programme that we're delivering is meeting our objectives. So on a monthly basis, we collect a national minimum data set from each and every site. We've now got 14 areas that are being evaluated by Northampton University, and that's a 3-year-long evaluation. We're just coming to the end of year 1. So as I said, they're overseen by the Health and Justice Commissioners, who have set key performance indicators for each and every site to make sure we have a consistency across each and every service. And the clinical psychologists in all of the sites meet every month to make sure we've got consistency across the programme. Just quickly, some underpinning principles. So wherever we can, and the services are set up to deliver this, we want to assess on the first appearance in court, and if possible, being able to offer a treatment requirement into the pre-sentence report on the day in court. We know that's not always possible because of listings, etc., but where we can, we're available to do that. If somebody is sentenced to a medium level community order or higher, there is now the availability to combine the treatment requirements, which is great, and we're seeing that happen. Within the sites, within the providers, part of their contract is around making sure that they're offering awareness, not only to probation and to court staff, but also to the judiciary. If you go on to the next slide, please. So this is just a second, just to say that the programme, we have a very small central programme team, so I oversee it, but we have a platform called the CSTR platform, and it's on Futures with all of our information and data on it. Now, if anybody would like access to this, just drop me an email and I can send you a link straight and you can go straight in there. We've now got another video on there as well, which came on last week, and all of our documents are on there around scaling up and developing local sites. Just a little bit about Scale Up. So we're currently at 32% coverage. Somerset went live on Wednesday this week and Liverpool went live on Monday last week. We will be at 50% coverage of England by late summer and 100% coverage by 22-23, which is fantastic. So if you just go on to the next slide, so I'm conscious of time also. Just a real snapshot to say, well, what is this doing? If you remember, one of our aims and objectives is to increase the use of the 3 treatment requirements. Of course, it's not just increasing the use. We want to make sure that it offers a difference to people's lives and it reduces reoffending. First 12 sites went live 2019. Not all of them went live during that year, but before they went live, collectively, we were talking about 80 mental health treatment requirements across those 12 sites. Within the first year, and some of them were part years through, 680 mental health treatment requirements were sentenced with 100 combined orders. So that, of course, we're now at 22 sites now. So you can see how that is increasing. Clinical outcomes, when you receive the slides, we've had the first year's report from our independent evaluation. I've got it here, so if you like to click there, you can find out a little bit more about the evaluation. I think that that's the last slide. What we have now is I've popped in a video. This is a video of a lady with lived experience of this programme, and it just provides you with the benefits that this programme can offer. Thank you, Tammy.
Thousands of people with a mental illness are coming into the criminal justice system each year, but their needs are being missed at every stage. Short custodial sentences are not as effective as robust community orders in reducing reoffending. Many individuals present with poor mental health, previous or current trauma, but haven't been able to access or aren't considered severe enough to be supported by a specialist mental health, thereby falling through the gap in treatment provision. There are 3 treatment requirements that are available to the judiciary which may be included into a community order to provide treatment and the interventions for those with mental health, drugs and alcohol issues. Both national and local strategic partners have now come together to increase the use of these treatment requirements. NHS England and NHS Improvement are now commissioning new services to provide the mental health treatment requirements, also known as MHTRs, across courts in England. You're about to hear how the availability of this treatment requirement has changed Sam's life, her journey through the criminal justice system and her voice. This is Sam's story.
Growing up, my mum was in an abusive relationship, and I always felt like I had to look after her. Yeah, my stepdad he could be evil, but then I still clung on to the fact that he was the only father figure that I had. When I was 17, I fell pregnant and I had a miscarriage. My head just exploded. And I went, you need to get me a GP, I need to see someone. And I think then getting into an adult relationship with somebody, I found somebody who was very protective. He could fix everything, put his hand to anything. If I needed anything doing, he'd do it. I didn't have to ask. You can look at that and feel that you are safe. But then the cracks start to show. Back in 2018, I was in a domestic abuse relationship. There were a lot of times where I felt, if I don't get out now, I'm going to end up dying. You see the bad side of it, and it's not always the bad side. That's not what an abusive relationship is about. It's not all about the physical violence. It's not all about that. It's the mind games. I'd actually gone out with my partner at the time, and yeah, we'd been drinking.
Understanding the complexity of abuse can be challenging. You will hear how the trauma that Sam has endured for many years becomes unbearable.
I mean, I attacked him for 11.5 minutes. The rage that I felt frightened me. Unfortunately, I was arrested and charged with ABH. It wasn't until about a year after I'd been arrested that I knew what liaison and diversion was.
Sam tells us how the offence was completely out of character, accumulating in years of abuse. The prevalence of mental health that Sam has struggled with for many, many years without identification took on a life of its own.
They would inform me when I was going to go to court. Now, I thought I'd probably go to court sometime that week. It was 3 weeks. I was an absolute nervous wreck. And I said, this is serious. I think I'm going to go to prison. I arrived at court, I hadn't told any of my friends, any of my family. I sent my children to school. What happens to my children if I get taken and, you know, sent in a van? Who do I went, will I get a phone call? No one knows I'm here. I had to ask my solicitor what was going on because I said, you know, I didn't hear any of that. And he said, what do you mean you didn't hear? I said, well, I'm deaf in my left ear. I couldn't hear anything.
After learning of her disability, Sam was finally offered the help she needed to support her engaging with the court process, as well as to hear what was being said.
They wanted to see if I was eligible for a mental health treatment requirement. I hadn't got a clue what they were talking about. And they said, how long have you been in the mental health system? And I said, well, I've been going to the doctors and been trying to seek mental health advice and treatment for years. It's a bit of a relief actually, because I felt like somebody was listening. I was sentenced, I had 6 months mental health treatment requirement. It was 18 weeks suspended for 12 months. I was ashamed of what I'd done, but what they needed to know was the reasons why. That if I'd have gone to prison, I would come out with the mentality of, I've been there, I've done that. Working on the CSTR programme and working through that and doing the mental health treatment requirement is probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. In order for these programmes to work, you need to have the feedback from somebody who's gone through it.
Sam is part of our East Midlands Health and Justice Lived Experience panel, commissioned via revolving doors and supports existing and new sites to ensure there is as seamless a pathway as possible for individuals.
I was having talks with magistrates and stuff, and it was just like, this is crazy. What's going on? I had all these magistrates afterwards coming up and talking to me and going, you know, I can't believe what you've done. You know, you're really doing really well. Which kind of gave me a little bit of a big head, but you know. The CSTR programme works. It's given me my voice back. I feel fantastic now. I help support ladies that are going through the system, and I help support ladies that are on the mental health treatment requirements. So I've kind of come full circle, and the CSTR programme has saved my life.
Thank you for that, and thanks Mignon, really powerful stuff. Appreciate that. I'm going to move on now to hear from Charlie Brooker. I think
you can talk to me if you like.
Yeah, well, I think they're more interested to hear what you've got to say than me, so you can go for it.
When you were introducing the programme at the outset, Tammy, you said I was going to be talking about effectiveness in probation, mental health effectiveness. I could talk about that, but actually the brief I was given was engagement in probation around mental health issues, and that's what I'm going to focus on here. Can I have the next slide, please? I looked at all the comments that had been made in the mental health thematic review about engagement, particularly with mental health services. And these are some of the points that I've drawn out, specifically addressing probation. Of course, the review was about the criminal justice system as a whole. There's a need to develop and deliver a programme of mental health awareness raising for staff working within criminal justice services. This should include skills to better explain to individuals why they are being asked questions about their mental health, so there can be more meaningful engagement, and joint review of arrangements to identify, assess and support people with a mental illness as they progress through the CGS to achieve better mental health outcomes and agree plans for improvement. And I have to say, I think the first point is actually a little bit unfair to probation staff, because I cannot find anywhere in any policy document a good articulate description of what a probation officer's role is in relation to people with mental health. And if you go back to the probation health strategy, which is now at least a couple of years old, most of the things that are recommended in terms of probation's role is to detect mental health and substance misuse issues and to refer on meaningfully. That's the only place where there's anything said directly about what probation staff should do in this particular arrangement. So next slide, please, Tammy. The Inspectorate was pleased to find that conversations about an individual's motivation and readiness to engage with supervision were done well in the vast majority of cases. That's about, obviously, engagement with probation supervision generally. But under half of those cases reviewed did not contain a comprehensive analysis of mental health needs. Practitioners need to be better equipped to talk to individuals about their mental health problems and understand their specific needs. So it's a kind of reiteration of the point earlier. Next slide, please. Can I have the next slide, Tammy?
Has it not come up?
No.
Oh,
yeah, I've got it now, yeah. Resettlement planning was fragmented, with work undertaken in custody not always following through into the community. Often work was to the gate rather than through the gate, and this was compounded by service users being released to many different areas where the availability of services differed by mental health trust or commissioning arrangements. And of course, this lack of continuity impacts on engagement and outcomes. So, there's a bit of a mixed picture there. Next slide, please. This is about the principles of engagement in the broadest sense. And I think they're worth referring to here in relation to probation. So care and support the person is person-centered, personalised and empowering. Services are created in partnership with citizens and communities. So there, I would say in relation to mental health, that not only have you got to ascertain what someone's mental health needs are, but to direct them to the most appropriate service, you need to know something about what those services are offering, if indeed they are offering anything meaningful and useful. The focus should be on equality and narrowing inequality. Carers' needs should be identified too. That might be a big ask for probation, but it's certainly not a big ask once someone gets into the right sort of mental health service. And I know many people who work in public health who would say that item number 5 is maybe the most important. Voluntary, community and social enterprise and housing sectors have to be involved in this whole process of engagement. It's system-wide. So, of course, engagement with an individual is really important. And as we've seen from the thematic review, in terms of probation supervision, that's something that probation officers generally do very well. But I think engagement in the sense that you need to ascertain what someone's mental health problem is probably a very different matter. We did a piece of work going back to 2014 now on the prevalence of mental health disorders in the probation service, and there were some quite disturbing findings about what probation staff knew about the fact that people had been previously engaged with services and previously diagnosed. And I think that the biggest problem category there was for psychosis and schizophrenia, where it was something like 23% of all the cases with a psychosis were known about by probation staff. And I have to say that's a bit of a worry. Okay, next slide, please. Going back to that prevalence study again, I want to just break down what you might describe as an average probation caseload. So let's say that's likely to be 50 to 60 people. And I'm drawing on the caseloads, workloads and staffing levels in probation service paper by the Inspectorate. We know that the prevalence of mental illness on probation caseloads is about 40%. The most robust study was ours, which looked at that, which was based on a random sample. Thus, on your caseload at any one time, taking 60 as the conservative figure for the caseload size, you're going to have this array of people. 24 people overall with a mental illness, 8 of whom are likely to have a serious mental illness, and by that I mean a major depressive disorder or a psychotic disorder, 14 who have a common mental health disorder, which is, I suspect, although Mignon might correct me, is the more common diagnoses that are being seen in the CSTR programme. And in addition, 2 or 3 will have PTSD, formal PTSD, not just experience of trauma, and OCD. Moving on. In addition to that, 11 people are going to have an alcohol problem, and something like another 3 will also have a drug problem, and those 2 are measured by audit and DAST. And the vast majority of people, I hate this phrase, personality disorder, because for me it's just an index of how traumatic people's lives have been previously. You know, in terms of a diagnostic category, personality disorder exists, and the vast majority of people with a mental illness in probation also will have a personality disorder. Okay. Now, you know, if you think about your own caseloads, can you say, hand on heart, that you know who these people are? I mean, okay, you know, there'll be some slight changes given the in those figures, given the prevalence estimates, which will have variation around them, but generally speaking, what I've just presented is what your caseload will look like. Okay, next slide, please. If you're a more experienced probation officer, you might be interested to know about the types of screening tools that are available that might help you identify mental health problems. So, for example, I know for a fact that audit is often used to assess problematic drinking, and you may well be aware of the use of audit in probation. We've just written a recent review which is indicating that these other measures might be helpful too. You've got the PHQ-9, which measures likely depression, the GAD-7, which measures clinical anxiety. You've got CAM-4s. You talked, Tammy, earlier about the needs that arise that people have as a result of their mental health problems. Well, CAM-4s will identify what those are likely to be. They could be things like loneliness. They could be things like problems with finance. They could be a whole range of things, but CAM-4s would be good if it was used systematically in probation to identify those needs. And there's also this measure, the PSQ, which has been used in quite a bit of prison research, which measures likely psychotic disorder, one area where I think probation is probably quite weak. On the next slide, I'm going to talk about a study by James Fowler, which was undertaken in London in 2019, which I think is really important. This was not an intervention offered as part of a mental health treatment requirement. It was an intervention of a psychological therapy, as I understand it, not dissimilar to the one developed by St Andrews and used in the current CSTR programme, which was offered to people who screened over 6 on the Kessler 6. Sorry, if you scored over 13, you were offered the intervention, and that's just a global measure of mental health status. And as I say, the intervention consisted of this manualised CBT type intervention, which aimed for emotional regulation, and copyright to St Andrews. Next slide, please. If you look at how many people were originally offered the intervention, it was, I'm struggling to read that on my screen, but I think it's 569. If you go to the bottom and look out of those 569, how many successfully completed treatment, it was 75. And that represents 13%, just 13% of all those people that were offered a psychological therapy. Now, of course, you know, this isn't as an alternative to a short prison sentence. This is everybody in the service who was screened to have a mental health problem. So it is a different scenario to CSTRs, but I do think it is important because, you know, in the sense that this was people deciding that a psychological therapy of this kind was going to be useful for people in probation, seeing whether they would be likely to accept it if offered it. And it shows you this graph, I think, of this figure, as you go through it, how people were reacting to receiving this therapy. And I think if you go back to that circle that I had at the beginning of all the different elements of engagement, where talked about the person with the mental health problem themselves being involved in discussing what would be the most likely useful therapy for them or intervention, maybe that reinforces the point I'm trying to make, because you know, you have to ask why for so few people who had a mental health problem was this psychological therapy not helpful for. I think mental health services actually fail people in the criminal justice system as a whole, not just in probation. And there's a big question that remains unanswered about what their role should be. We talk about equivalence and the fact that people in the criminal justice system should receive equivalent services, but where are the equivalent folk in the general community who have a mental health disorder, who have a substance misuse problem, who have personality disorder, and whose needs are highly complex? They're not very obvious, and services aren't really tailored to working with people with that panoply of problems. I think that you can see that in a small way with dual diagnosis. If you've just got a mental health disorder and you've got a substance misuse problem, forget about personality disorder for a moment. There is a constant toing and froing in mainstream mental health services between drug service, drug and alcohol services, and mental health services about whose responsibility this person is and who should see them first. If you throw personality disorder into the mix, it becomes even more problematic. I personally believe that what should be developed in general is something along the lines of the assertive outreach model, which has now sadly been discontinued because it was too expensive back in 2011, but which up until then was a great model in every service where mental health staff with small caseloads and worked with people with complex needs, knew where they were, knew them very well, knew where to find them, knew what was likely to cause some sort of relapse for them, and worked with them intensely. And that is actually a model that is followed by a number of probation services in America, in the United States. So just a few thoughts there about mental health and probation, centering on the theme of engagement. Can I just put up the last slide, which is my email address? If you're interested in knowing anything more about those outcome measures that might make a more structured contribution to your assessment about people with mental health needs, please write to me and I'll send them to you. We're engaged in a research study at the moment where two big probation services are recruiting people from their caseloads to use measures like this to understand two things really. One, how easy is it to integrate use of those measures into practice? And B, does it make any difference when you do, when you're able to articulate in a more coherent way with the service provider what someone's needs might be? So thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Charlie. Really appreciate that. Okay. And next, we've got Sunny, who's going to talk about engagement with substance misuse.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I think if you switch your mic off, Tammy, it might reduce the feedback. I think it stops now, so I heard myself again. Sorry, yeah, sounds good. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sunny Dhadley. I'm formerly a strategic lived experience advisor to NHS England, NHS Improvement within their Health and Justice Directorate. And I'll just spend a couple of minutes, if it's okay, just talking through a bit about my background. So I'm an individual with lived experience of problematic drug use that was closely associated, and I was never far away from the long arm of the law. Was a criminal. By no stretch of the imagination would I class myself as being a criminal due to my addiction. However, in the eyes of the world and society, I would have been deemed in such a way. If I take us back to 2007, by which point I'd been in treatment services dozens of times, literally, each time with the intention of changing my life and moving forwards. The only time that it really worked for me was when I was self-empowered to input into the type of intervention that I felt was needed, and I'm eternally grateful that through fighting and championing my cause that I managed to receive that. What I would say is treatment, looking at it retrospectively, although it was massively important in terms of having that type of intervention, is not a silver bullet. Treatment in itself won't fix people or help people to fix themselves. And I think it's just important to note where the parameters by which we hold other services as being able to transform individuals. That really has to come from the individual. So I'll talk a little bit about how I worked in that space to help and encourage my peers to take control of every opportunity that was available and afforded to them. I could speak about governance, policies, funding, research, academia, KPIs, leadership, all of which are important, but I'll very much focus on kind of sharing my experiences of what was an effective way of engaging with people with substance misuse needs. So my journey started as a volunteer, which is often the case for people with lived experience. And I remember one of my first experiences was being asked to go into probation and speak to people who were serving DRRs and to consult with them to find out what was working, what wasn't working, what could be made better, and then to feed that back to local strategic boards and meetings and really elevate the voices of people that weren't in that room. I continued to do this for a number of weeks and months. I found myself in a leadership role not too long after I joined an organisation, which opened the door to further kind of meetings and rooms where we would discuss such matters. And what I would say was that there was a stark disparity, and the disparity that I learned very early was that the experiences of people accessing probation or having issues with drugs or alcohol compared to the strategic aspirations of whoever the funder may be or whichever policy area that sat within was quite large. So becoming increasingly frustrated that the movement of change wasn't as quick as my peers would have liked or I would have liked, I decided to do more than offer just an opportunity for people to share their experiences with us, but to actually provide almost a mediator role between services and the individual. And I could speak at length about, my experiences around that, but I'll kind of summarize it in the following way. So in the year that I left this organization in 2019, so having been there for over a decade, with 2.4% of the funding allocation for drug and alcohol treatment in the city where we operated, we supported 1,072 of my peers, many of whom will have been in contact with the criminal justice system, the vast majority of whom will have had substance misuse and or mental health needs. And again, one of the learnings that I took was that a lot of the services were out there. A lot of the interventions that people needed were out there. The thing that was missing was the coordination of it. So the continual feedback that we were getting was Department for Work and Pensions aren't meeting my needs, or housing aren't meeting my needs. And because people weren't able to self-advocate, we provided that role. So in the year that I left this organisation, we supported 1,072 people. We delivered 5,283 interventions. And when we looked at these interventions, they covered 72 areas of need. So drugs being one of them, alcohol requirement, alcohol being another, homelessness, unemployment, etc., etc. The way in which we delivered these interventions was by working in collaboration, often in a non-contractual way with organisations that were around us. And in that year, we worked in collaboration with 486 individual organisations, groups, resources, departments to meet the needs of those 1,072 people. One example of an outcome that we produced during that year is that 69 people were supported into full-time employment. And anyone that works within this field or within public health will know the benefits of people finding employment. What I would say is that employment in itself isn't the consideration around employment, should I say, is that it needs to be the right type of employment that people go into. I often say to people, and I still say today, that if you can make your passion your profession, then work is like play. And I think there are opportunities for people along their life journey to revisit that notion. If it didn't work out for people while they were younger at school, like myself, then perhaps through difficult circumstances, you can find, where your niche is and how to go about achieving your goals and aspirations. Another reflection is that the vast majority of literally thousands of peers that I was lucky enough to support either individually or through an organisation, I think social mobility was something that screamed out as being lacking. So, none of us choose where we're born. None of us choose the colour of our skin. Often, by virtue of being born in a certain postcode, that could automatically be attributed to certain outcomes. And what we try to do is break some of these kind of cycles that were often out of individuals' control. And support people to achieve the best outcomes for them individually. And I think that's the really important thing that I wanted to say, is that for me, we could talk about engagement. Absolutely, it's important. We could talk about funding. Of course, we need that. We can talk about interventions. Yes, let's make sure we get the right interventions. But at the end of the day, these are human beings that we're talking about. So, I think we need to connect with people on that human level to achieve the best outcomes for them individually, whilst at the same time that would, hopefully improve performance. But most importantly, will improve life outcomes, which is, what it's all about. So, just if I bring it back to the slide in front of us. So, I think it's really important, and it's been alluded to a few times. But context for me is massively important. In understanding what led people with substance misuse needs to your service or to court, and as that video beautifully illustrated. There are many different reasons why people may end up, being in contact with the criminal justice system. Some of the things that scream, that were really prevalent during my time working in the community voluntary sector were poverty, trauma, deprivation. Increasingly now there's more of a focus on unmet neurodiversity needs, and I think that absolutely needs to have more attention and focus, and a lack of real, positive social networks. So, people would often, for example, call me like, I see you as my counselor, or I see you as my mentor, or I see you as my this, that, and the other. But in actual fact, I was just they're leading an organization and wanting to achieve the best outcomes for you as an individual. And leading on from the individual, absolutely, we need to look at the whole person and meet those holistic needs. And this can only be done in collaboration. It can't be done individually. And where possible, drive innovation. So through this process of working collaboratively, one of the things that's required is to have an understanding of the local ecosystem, and importantly how to best navigate it. And I would often say to people who would ask, what was it that made your organization so successful? And I said we would circumnavigate cumbersome and complex systems alongside people that found it difficult to do so themselves, so that they could achieve different outcomes to trying to do it unaided. And I think for anyone, either working in probation or other associated parts of the system, understand the local ecosystem and how to navigate it, and where there are barriers, and if there are barriers, how to overcome those barriers. That could be through working alongside organizations to help them to understand. It could be through strategic influencing. So there's lots of different ways in which that can happen. In terms of some tangible action, so build trust. And I think, as some of our speakers have already said, I think that is a really important part of being able to work effectively with anyone with a substance misuse need, is to build that trust. And I think our good speaker just before me spoke about the average caseload. I think we need to really consider how we use our time most effectively. So if you've got 60 people that you're working with, which is a huge number of people, what is it that you can do within your practice that can ensure that the time that you spend with them is spent most effectively? And that could include some affirmative actions agreed on both sides, and then to follow up on those actions. And one thing, I learned from my early life is that, it's definitely better to under-promise and over-deliver. And I think that's the same for working with people within the criminal justice system. In terms of one's own kind of journey, be aware of conscious and either conscious or unconscious bias that you may have. Look at do your own research, look at the history of things like prohibition and the role that they have played in creating the world in which we live today. And by doing that, you'll get a deeper understanding of decade upon decade of certain decisions that have led to certain policy decisions that we're seeing today. One thing that I'm a massive and huge advocate of is understanding social value and social impact. So not only by helping people with mental health and substance misuse needs get the right receive the right treatment will be good for them, will be good for society, but let's look at how we measure this in a more tangible way. Let's look at how we can use different metrics to see how the work that we collectively are doing is playing in positively influencing the future of social mobility. One thing I was a little bit unsure about putting in, but I've put it in there, is that the concept of whistleblowing. So I'm sure that there's people who have noticed perhaps certain behaviours or certain attitudes or certain stigmas, perhaps that are at play. And I think in order to achieve the best outcomes that we want to do, that we want to achieve, then there is definitely a role for whistleblowing to play in that, and to call out inappropriate behaviour amongst staff, amongst colleagues, as well as people accessing services as well. And I'll also, just before I finish, just talk about the value of lived expertise. So rather than lived experience, let's look at the knowledge that lived experience brings, the knowledge equity that can bring to improving how we understand and work with both mental health, substance use. my screen's gone blank, it's come back on. But yeah, some of the ways in which, you know, I've seen it working really well. I was involved, for example, with the Dame Carol Black review part 2, and it was good to do that. But, you know, governance, policy, practice, workforce development, building strategies, you know, that are future-proof, quality assurance. I mean, the list goes on in terms of how much of a value a lived experience can bring. So I would implore each one of you to look at that within your own area of responsibility, within your own area of influence, and look at how you can draw that in. If you just take me to my last slide. I didn't want to play it now, but I gave a TEDx talk entitled "Activating Lived Experience to Create Social Change." So I'll leave that that link in there, and that will be shared when the slide deck is made available. But happy to receive any questions, any comments, good, bad, or indifferent. You know, we only learn by receiving all forms of feedback. I have to give a shout out to Jay Valentino, who's the guy that created this piece of artwork while I was on stage delivering my TEDx talk. But yeah. Thank you for the opportunity for giving me for affording me the chance to speak today, and thank you to the other speakers. You've been you know, inspirational really in terms of what you've covered, and if anyone would like to get in contact with me, I'll leave my contact details in the chat box. Thanks, Tammy.
Sorry, I had to remember to take myself off mute. Avatar, would you like to?
Yeah, great. Thank you very much indeed. So as we kind of come to the latter stages of our time together, just to say that, you know, Tammy began really by reminding us of the framework that the Probation Inspectorate uses in order to make judgments about, you know, the difference that you know, practice is making. And then you know, Mignon shared with us that although it was back in you know, 2003 that it was recognized that you know, issues around substance use and mental health use needed a priority. It's been very, very snail pace, hasn't it? And it's been quite sluggish. And I think there are probably a whole range of reasons for that, and probably the one that we can mostly identify with is that it was fine to say that you know, somebody needed mental health treatment, or somebody needed substance use treatment. If there wasn't anybody to actually deliver it, it was problematic. And Charlie quite rightly you know, posed that question. Well, but what is the role of the probation officer? You know, where can I find the answer in terms of, you know, what should she or he be doing in terms of these key issues which, you know, as Charlie reminded us, you know, significantly appear within the caseloads of, you know, probation practitioners who are working with adults, but also, you know, social workers and youth justice workers who are working with children. We mustn't forget that for them, you know, this whole issue about substance misuse and also, you know, mental health is also prevalent. The chicken and the egg. I love that at the beginning, you know, our kind of slide, you know, what actually came first? You know, did the chicken come first, or did the egg come first? And as practitioners, there is a challenge there, isn't there, about, you know, is it because of people's mental, you know, unwell being that they are turning to substance use, or is the substance use actually contributing to escalating, you know, issues within their mental health needs? And, you know, as practitioners and, you know, us, we talk about, you know, comorbidity, neurodiversity. You know, we use all these languages, but I think that what has come across from all our speakers is really, so what? You know, what is gonna make a difference? You know, Sam's powerful testimony of how she, through her life, entered a life experience in which you know, harm was caused to her, and she reacted in a way that was really a product of all that had happened to her. And then she told us the story, didn't she, about how you know, coming into contact with a provision actually made a difference in her life. And it was absolutely wonderful, wasn't it, to listen to her, to actually talk about what it was that made the difference. And as Sunny reminded us again, you know, of course, leadership is important. Of course, governance is important. Of course, you know, money is important. But he reminded us about the essential role that connecting with people play. Charlie talked about engagement, and he shared some information about, you know, his views about what engagement is. And I think that, you know, what I'd like to just say in terms of, you know, bringing, you know, all this together is that, you know, this is challenging. This is indeed challenging, and different people at different levels have different roles to play. But at a practitioner level, you know, the question is, well, you know, what can I do? You know, what should I do? And it is absolutely true that probation practitioners are not experts. You know, women and men who know about mental health, who know about substance use. However, there is a challenge, isn't there? Even as we live our lives, you know, as neighbours, you know, we may not understand, I don't know, environmental law, or somebody building a gate over a piece of land that belongs to us. What do? We try to find out, we try to learn, we try to understand. And in terms of the role, as probation practitioners, I think there is a need for reflecting on how can we expand, you know, our knowledge and our understanding of what is available, not about becoming experts and, you know, delivering services in an expert way. I was just thinking back, you know, as a practitioner, learning about motivational interviewing for the first time. And you know what? It absolutely transformed the way that I worked with people. So I think that there are tools, there are ways that, you know, as practitioners, you know, we can enhance our practice. And I really, really hope that the contribution of all our speakers has just given us that moment to say, do you know what? I think I need to do that. Or do you know what? I need to find out a little bit more, because it matters. It matters, you know, to the people who are leading lives which are causing, you know, massive harm and massive damage. We as human beings need to live our best lives, and we as human beings have a responsibility to help each other to live our best lives as well. And I really hope that the input that has been given this afternoon will help us a little bit, and that we will indeed, you know, follow this up with perhaps emailing, you know, Charlie, Sunny, Mignon, you know, and even Tammy, to find out a little bit more. But thanks for that, Tammy.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Avatar. Right, I think we've now at the point of the section where we're going to open it up for any comments or discussions. And so I will just turn the recording off while I remember to do so. Stop recording. Right.